In 1956, World Health Organization and the AMA, American Medical Association, accepted alcoholism as a disease. In the 30s, when treating heroin, they found an enzyme called tetrahydroisoqualane in heroin treatment. That same enzyme was found in alcohol treatment. Dr. Virginia Davis in 1971 did a lot of research on it out in Houston, Texas. The same enzyme that is addictive in alcohol is also addictive in heroin. So the treatment methodologies and the labels kind of paralleled each other. Now, I don't have an exact date when they started accepting heroin, but in the definition of alcoholism, it fits heroin in there because of the research that was done. Tetrahydroisoqualane, THIQ, you can look it up directly under that name and get the research. Now, that was kind of solidified by way of research in the 1990s. It's not the only way, and it's not the only identification and method that the progression of the disease is prolonged, but it's one of the major ways that has been studied. It's a lot of science, man. Addiction is a brain disease. It affects every area of the body because it affects the brain first. The prefrontal cortex, using particular drugs, it dims that to the degree that your ability to make rational decisions is always affected. They call it arrested development. The time that you start using a particular drug, that arrested development occurs and your major emotional systems is shut down to the degree that when you stop, or if you stop 30, 40 years later, you still have what we call the king baby syndrome and you're still acting like a kid. Dr. Naim Akbar in Visions of Black Men, if you read that, you'll find that he talks about the immature male, black male, wanting to have a crib instead of wanting to have a home. And that's the level of immaturity that we remain in. Instead of wanting to be responsible within society, we continue to actually be plagues on our society based on the trauma that we initially experienced.
So, Baba, you mentioned children, the K2 experience that you've had over in DC. So what would you say to parents that have their children in the school system, where the school system is encouraging the parents to agree to have their children medicated, knowing that these are developing minds, and as you just stated, that addiction is directly tied to the brain? What would you say to them to circumvent that path and still have their children go through the school system and not have them medicated?
That hits home because I have grandchildren in that system and my children have been in that miseducated system. And what I have done, and I believe that this is one of the most significant ways, is you educate your children, but you also take advantage of being able to go into the school system because you have children. Start your own community groups, go within the recreation centers, do education, get somebody like myself to come in and do education. But education is important, one of the most important things that you're going to do. And more than anything else, be the example for your children. You can't tell your children not to use drugs if you high every day yourself. So you not only must you educate, you must also be the example. I have a granddaughter who is diagnosed with the ADHD thing. Mm-hmm. She's 15, 16 now. Initially, I educated her parents to change the diets and all of the different things that needed to be done, and educated her on symptomology as it's been described. It got to a point that she could identify her symptoms, but she couldn't stop them. Even with the change of the diet, she asked us to take her and get her on medication. Now, this was 4 or 5 years ago. I met with the psychiatrist and all of them myself. I was there. I mean, they ain't let nobody just give my children nothing without me being there. So what happened is the medication, because it was monitored, she was able to manage her symptomology to the degree that she's not on medication now. Okay. Education is the number one remedy for allowing white folks to take over your children's mind. I think that my case may be just an individual case because I am knowledgeable and I was there on the front line. I'm not allowing anybody to just give somebody in my family something and me not know what it is and me not question. Because one of the things that happen within the medical community, we don't understand that we're partners with that medical society, with that psychiatrist, with that doctor, with whoever it is. We are partners. So they can't dictate what they want you to do without there being an exchange. I mean, even my own practice, one of the first things I make them aware is that we're partners. I'm going to give you information, and it's up to you to use it. And anything, question that you ask me, I'm going to answer it honestly and truthfully so you'll know exactly what you're doing. But we also have to make sure that on that same front line with those psychiatrists, with those psychologists, we need to be able to question them about side effects, about symptoms. Because if we don't, we put our children into their hands again.
I want to get into the area of metaphysics.
Okay.
Us being melanated people and melanin being a aromatic organic amine, do you see deeper depths of addiction with melanated people and understanding that a lot of these drugs are particularly developed to affect the molecules in melanin in our bodies? Do you see higher rates of addiction or deeper levels of addiction within the Black community as opposed to other communities?
Statistics will tell you that more white folks get addicted to drugs, particularly the heroin type drugs, than Black folks. But we know the highest amount of crime and the highest amount of arrest and the highest amount of documentation of the results of those drugs are in the Black communities. Because the question that you ask in the way that you ask it takes a deeper research of science than I have gone to really be able to identify on that level. Now, I do know that the drugs itself will crystallize the pineal gland. I do understand that, which is also one of the things that happen when the prefrontal cortex is impaired. Now, because we know that the other does not have as much melanin governing their pineal gland, it's not as effective, so it will affect us more. But as to answer your question directly, I don't have the research to be able to say a yay or a nay on that. My belief system is because we have experienced trauma and that trauma has been handed down through the DNA over the generations. The reason why a person uses any drug is to make themselves feel good, better, or different. I understand that the trauma and know that the trauma that we have experienced have affected us emotionally on so many different levels that we are susceptible almost immediately to use something outside of ourselves instead of using our internal spiritual equipment that we have in order to heal ourselves, because we do have that ability. But because we're never educated and we're still experiencing the trauma that we experience, that oftentimes you don't get to that. I mean, I'm fortunate and blessed that the universe and the ancestors woke me up to the degree that I know what I know today. I've always been knowledgeable, but I was still asleep. I've always had information. There's never a time on the planet that I haven't been exposed to information, but yet there was that level of unconsciousness because of the drug-orientated mentality and thinking that I wasn't able to see beyond the drug-orientated mentality. It was always about me protecting the drug, protecting the supply. The moment that you start talking about, I need to stop doing that, I'm ready to fight you because I don't know how to use the internal, metaphysical, spiritual information and energy that can help me heal myself.
For our Kujenga listeners, could you define metaphysics as well as the pineal gland? We don't want to assume that our listeners may know what those terms mean.
Energy, spiritual energy. Doctrine will teach you how to measure and designate how to implement healing techniques and strategies, from taking a pill to exercising to getting a particular test. Whereas though metaphysical will allow you to go inside of yourself, call on the spiritual energy from the religiosity that introduced it to heal yourself. Metaphysics generally comes from Christian-based ideology. Dealing with the Christian-based ideology, there are those theories and those doctrines. When we start looking at metaphysics, we go deeper into the doctrine and find just the pure spirituality, the pure energy, and how that energy is manipulated and utilized to help us heal ourselves.
I pronounce it pineal gland, and it's the gland that sits above the master gland. It sits above the pituitary gland in the center of your brain. And what we understand about it metaphysically is that it actually receives, let's say, energy. It receives information from the cosmos. It's a tune-in antenna, if you will, and it's meant to be erect and unhindered, uncovered by chemical. It sits in the center between the two hemispheres, the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, in the substantia nigra. And it is responsible for the release of melatonin and serotonin in the cycle of the circadian rhythm. So basically, it tells your pituitary gland what your body should be gearing itself up to emit hormonally throughout the day, throughout the hours. So that's why it is the master gland, because it's the timekeeper for what the pituitary gland, which is the master gland for releasing all the hormones in your body, is going to, how it's going to operate and when it's going to release all the hormones that your body needs to function. Hormones are what your body functions off of. So if your body needs to perform a function, a hormone precedes that. So basically, if your glands are not working, your hormones are off, your body isn't going to be working efficiently. And if your pineal gland isn't erect and receiving those energies from the cosmos, it's going to be out of tune with what time and how much signal it should be sending to the pituitary gland to tell the rest of the glands in your body what hormones to release. Now, hormones, they are the chemical compounds of life. Without these hormones running through your body, and we're not just talking about testosterone and estrogen. There are dozens of hormones that govern hundreds of functions in the body. Every bodily function that you have is preceded by a hormone. So that's what makes this pineal gland important medically. Now, if we move over to the metaphysical side of it, the pineal gland is the third eye gland, if you will, a gland that sees outside of the spectrum of light and radiation that the eyes see. So this is the gland that helps you when you are sleeping to have lucid dreams, because it can see outside of the spectrum of visible light. It can see radioactivity and light. It picks up things in the way of premonition if you're dealing with it on a metaphysical level. It's the sixth sense, the knowing without being told, the feeling that precedes an action that you felt funny, you got prickly, I have a bad vibe. These are all metaphysically rooted in the receptive capabilities of the pineal gland. When you're standing next to someone and their energy isn't right, that's the pineal gland picking up that energy from one person to the next.
Talking about a spider sense.
Spider sense.
Absolutely. So Spider-Man would have like a massive, hyper massive spidey pineal hybrid gland of both spider and human, which gives him the spidey sense, right? And again, the lucid dreaming. Now, if we understand African concepts of dreaming in time, then we understand also that dreaming is time travel. So remember that scene from Black Panther where T'Challa is able to speak with his father and his ancestors. Well, a dream like that we know is governed by the timelessness of the time travel that the pineal gland allows us to experience. So that's where those lucid dreams come from, that we can be affected by our visions and we can be governed by our visions of past, visions of present, visions of possible future outcomes. Those are all governed from the pineal gland. That's the gland that allows you to see the light, if you will, and master the time travel in the sense that if all our memories are truly stored in our genetics, then it's the pineal gland that allows us to uncover those messages and interpret them and give them back to our brains in a way that we can interpret them as visual and audible signals, if you allow yourself to listen to the signals. And that's what in our ancient culture in Kemet, that Uraeus cobra being erect in the center of the pharaoh's crown, of the king's crown, that represented the clarity or the clarified, erect pineal gland that was fully awakened and upright, if you will. It's really heavy stuff, and we could have a whole episode on the pineal gland alone.
I wanted to go back to something you said about trauma passed down from generation to generation. You know, my grandfather, he grew up in the 20s and 30s. He was an alcoholic, and a lot of his peers were alcoholics. He was raised in the South, in Georgia, and doing a lot of research in my family, looking at death certificates. You see a lot of death from cirrhosis of the liver, a lot of alcohol-related deaths in terms of murder and violence. Could you speak to how the trauma has impacted or how we've been enveloped in trauma, and that has kind of led to alcoholism, especially in those generations?
When you have any kind of inclination of the trauma that we've experienced under the hand of the colonizer, you realize that we were in pain with consistency 24/7. Alcohol and cocaine and heroin and marijuana and any of those drugs that we would be able to use to numb the pain was our best friend, particularly since we did not have the tools to access the energy from the pineal gland. So we use things outside of ourselves in order to numb the pain that was going on inside, which is what we do today. I mean, we use the same techniques today. My father was also an alcoholic, and his pain, I mean, he died with his pain, man. He died with his pain and was never able to talk about it because he never understood how to talk about it. Pancreatitis is the other thing that we died from. Those cirrhosis of the liver, pancreatitis, those are diseases primarily of alcohol. That's not the only way you can get it, but you drink to the point that your liver gets hard. And once your liver gets, the purpose of the liver is to filter toxics and to guide nutrients to their proper place. So when the liver is impaired, that means that you can't filter the poisons out. It becomes bile, and the food that you might eat that's giving you nutritional value is stuck right there, and it does not go to where it needs to go. I mean, there's no greater population on the planet to have the pain and have endured the pain that we have. That pain is transferred through the DNA, but it ain't got to go to the DNA. All you got to do is watch your father have to deal with the crap that we have to deal with, and then you feel that yourself. You don't have to go through the DNA. I remember as a kid, a white guy came to our door to collect money. Now, my father, he met him at the door, and he said, "Monkey, I don't know white people come to my house to collect nothing. All my bills paid. I don't know why you here. Get off my door." The conversation didn't last that long, and the guy left. I felt every single thing that my father said. And I just repeated it to you as though it was happening right now. That's the trauma that's being passed down on a regular basis. My children have some of my trauma that if you would have asked them about certain incidents, you would think that they were grown when it happened. Now, that does not just apply to the things that we see. I mean, just think about how it makes you feel when you see the picture of Emmett Till or the 4 black girls that got blowed up. Or you think about Medgar Evers or Martin or Malcolm, and you feel that intense, whether it's anger, whether it's hate, or whether it's just helplessness. That's the stress and the trauma that we're talking about being transferred to generation to generation to generation to generation.
So, Baba, in your work, how are you helping our community to heal from that trauma?
Not as much as I want to, that's for sure. But one of the things that I do is first I have to help people identify that that's going on. And a lot of times that's almost the last thing that happens, because if I start pointing that out in the beginning, then they start pointing blame on other people instead of attempting to heal themselves. So what I do is educate on the power of thought. Once you get the drug out, you got to get the drug out first, because you can't teach somebody or give anybody new information if their brain is intoxicated. And literally, it takes years for the brain to be totally clear of all the drug. But in the very beginning, what I do is educate them on the miseducational system that we've been living under, and begin to teach them on how to think for themselves. This school system, this educational system have never taught us how to think. It has never taught us. It's taught us what to memorize, regurgitate, and give back. But it has never taught us how to critically think. So, and it's challenging because my program is a 28-day program. So I have to go in like a minute man and snatch up whatever I need to snatch up, give them what I need to give them, and then they go on to the next process. So what I do is I give them tools on how to reprogram their thinking. I give them affirmation, visualizations on how to use that vibratory energy to go inside of themselves to change their way of thinking and to help them heal themselves. That is an initiation for them to learn how to do it in the long run. This system in government, we used to be able to get people in treatment for 6 months to 18 months. Now, 3 days of detox, 28 days of treatment.
Is that adequate?
Hell no. It takes 10 positive strokes to balance one negative. 10 positive to balance one negative.
We live that.
Exactly. So here it is, just using the measurement of 1 year. If we use the measurement of 1 year, then it takes 10 years to balance that out. At the most that we can do is learn how to use the preponderance of our energy to help us create a new reciprocal energy back to us. If I start practicing a new way of thinking, since we know that as above, so as below, what you send out come back to you. If I start practicing a new way of thinking and be able to increase the energy at a higher vibration, I bring more positive energy back to me. Everybody cannot hear that because some of us, when we come in our level of trauma, our level of pain, our level of illness prevents us from being able to hear that information. Now, of course, the third time that they get back, if I'm still there, then when I give it to them, they say, yeah, you told me that before. I think I'm ready now. Now, I should also tell you that I was almost 40 when I started. When I started understanding that I had been programmed as a kid to attract certain energies to myself and had been doing it with all of this consciousness that I had been practicing. Nation of Islam, I was taught under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So there was a lot of information that I got, but I hadn't changed that basic information on the inside. It's like when you're doing computer, if I have WordPerfect as the software, then no matter what mathematical formula that I put in there, it's not going to come out Excel, it's going to come out WordPerfect. So if I got kill myself is the program that I have been initiated with, I don't care what type of information I get, unless I go in there to undo that program, I'm still talking about kill myself, and I may never consciously know it.
The other day, I came across a TED Talk on addiction, and this guy was speaking on a study that was done in the 70s with rats, where they put rats in a basic cage with two sources of water. One was plain water and the other was laced with cocaine. And the rats that were in the cage were quickly addicted, overdosed, and died. And so they stepped away from that research, that study, and said, well, this is how we can transpose this information and relay it to human beings and addiction.
The TED Talk that Evelyn is responding to, or Loon is responding to, is everything you think you know about addiction is wrong. And the study is by Johan Hari.
So this scientist came across the study and challenged it and said, well, this isn't realistic. These rats aren't given options that are available in real life. So this scientist decided to create a rat park, like a utopia, if you will, for rats. So it had, in that cage with the rats, it had all the cheese the rats could ever want to eat, balls, tunnels, just rat heaven. So the water sources remained the same. Simple water, plain water, untinged, and cocaine-laced water. Now, they found that these rats, still given the same access, would go to the cocaine-laced water less, and they were perceived to not be addicted, and none of them overdosed. And so they walked away from it, and what they were able to extract from that study is the opportunity to connect to something. Us as sentient beings require a level of bonding to something, whether we choose it to be people or to a substance or to an activity, that we need to identify and make sure that whatever it is that we are bonding to is something that is positive, because we're inclined to bond to something regardless. So we just have to be on guard as to what it is that we bond to. What do you have to say on that, based on your professional experience?
That basic study dealing with those rats, so is kind of operant conditioning dealing with Pavlov's and Skinner in the Skinner box. But the THIQ, the tetrahydroisoqualine, was what was done with the very first test. And because remember that chemical hormone within that has the same addictive quality as alcohol and heroin. That was the first test. And what you're talking about is one of the subsequent tests that was done afterwards. And Dr. Bobby Wright helped me to see this, even though because in my own academic studies, I've studied the Skinner box and Pavlov. We know that we are sensitized to respond to outside stimuli. And pain and emotional pain is one of the stimuli that we respond to. And I've kind of alluded to it and talked about the trauma. We as a people have not been taught how to bond. In fact, it's amazing to me that as much as we've been taught how to kill, we won't kill white folks. So to me, there's some training in that and some educational stuff in that prevents me from doing that. Well, maybe it's actually within the chemicals and how they're making the alcohol. I don't know. That's just supposition. But at the same time, there's a fact that as talented as we are in doing everything that we do, we refuse to do that. And there is no logical reason why. So I'm looking at operant behavior, and classical conditioning, which prevents us or teaches us that we don't create the unity that we need to have in order to bond to bring ourselves up.
You can tune in to us. We're on all platforms that involve podcast. You can always go to kujenga.fm. That's KUJENGA.fm, like the radio dial or the radio frequency. We're on YouTube at Kujenga Podcast, Facebook at Kujenga Podcast. And you can always email us at info@kujenga.fm with any questions, comments, concerns, ideas, or dialogue. Sign up to our mailing list. You can do that from the Kujenga Podcast Facebook page or from the Contact Us page at kujenga.fm.